Hi there! Nowadays, when you hear most of the mainstream environmentalist movement arguing against the unregulated free market economies and embracing socialism instead, one of the arguments that they use against the free market are tax breaks and subsidies for the fossil fuel corporations. But are those things in any way connected with the free market? Or is it just a strawman and problematic entity is somebody else? Before I can answer that, I need to define a few things. Those are being free market, scarcity, and prices. So let's start. Free market is a system where goods and services are voluntarily exchanged between individual entities. The verb voluntary here means that if you do not want a service or a product, you simply do not pay for it and leave it as it is, and no one can force you to pay for those things. The second aspect of the real free market is that no central institution grants any privileges or imposes regulations against any entities in this system. Those are the most important aspects of the free market. The word scarcity explains itself pretty well. It means that resources are limited and are not infinite, and is probably one of the most important things that economics studies. Since one definition of economics is the science which studies human behavior as a relationship between ends and scarce means that have alternative uses. The best way to distribute those scarce resources is through the system of prices. The most basic definition of a price is the amount of money that has to be paid in order to acquire a given product. The prices themselves are an excellent way to know what is going on. They tell us what consumers want, what producers are willing to produce, and how they behave when things change. For example, when there is a shortage, the prices rise up and consumers try to find the alternative. The producers see the high price and invest in the quote-unquote expensive things in order to profit from those high prices. The interesting thing is that a lot of producers can actually help to lower prices through competing with each other. The other thing that the producers can do is take a risk and introduce alternatives that can start as a cheap one and then gradually become expensive. This can attract other producers and lower the prices here as well. And now let's take a look at how government usually intervenes in economy. The things I have chosen are taxes, tax breaks, and subsidies. Government itself cannot be a free market participant, even if it is a minarchist one. Why, you might ask? Well, it is simple. Unless you are an ACAP or any other type of anarchist, for that matter, you know that unfortunately you cannot have a tax-free society and that some amount of taxation is necessary for government to function. And speaking of taxes, those are involuntary and enforced by the state, and you have to pay those regardless if you want or not. And the involuntary aspect of taxes explains why the government itself cannot be a free market entity, since it gets revenue through forced taxation and not through voluntary means like any other free market entity. The second reason that the government by itself cannot be a free market entity is because it can grant special privileges to certain companies, usually in the form of tax breaks and subsidies. Tax break is a reduction of income that is able to be taxed and is commonly a result of expenses, particularly those incurred to produce additional income. The subsidy is when the government pays the company to do something that the government sees as beneficial or useful, or because the companies lobbied for those laws that give them those privileges to have subsidies. The problem with that can be explained with something called the broken window fallacy, a story by the French economist Frédéric Bastiat. The broken window fallacy is a parable that is sometimes used to illustrate the problem with the notion that going to war, or in this case, some governmental quote-unquote support of economies, is good for a nation's economy. It's why the message is that an event that seems to be beneficial for those immediately involved can have negative economic consequences for many others. The theory suggests that a boost to one part of economy can cause losses to the other sectors of economy. So now that we established that tax breaks and subsidies are inherently incompatible with the definition of free market that I gave before, let's apply those examples into reality, especially with since 2010, governments have spent over $5 trillion in fossil fuel consumption subsidies. The majority of this sum went towards making oil more affordable. It is estimated that governments around the world spent $440 billion on subsidizing fossil fuel companies over 2021, representing a 142% rise over year. That means that governments gave the taxpayers' money to these big fossil companies and made them even more dominant on the market so they can drill oil, and those types of subsidies basically distort the price signals in such a way that it seems that people should just drill more oil and not search for better and more ecological alternatives that could have been the market sooner, if it weren't for those governmental subsidies, of course. And so we continue our dependence on fossil fuels, which is dangerous to our health, economy and environment. So why don't most environmentalists support lowering taxes, lowering the size of government, and most importantly, abolishing those governmental subsidies that caused this problem in the first place? Well, because of one very unfortunate thingy that could be described as the majority of modern environmental activists can be described as being political watermelons, meaning green on the outside and red on the inside. Take for example Greta, who recently said that we need to destroy capitalism, or an example from my own country called Reset Platforma, or in the English the Reset Platform, and that one is sponsored by Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, an openly socialist think tank. And that is really a shame, because that paints all people who are concerned about nature and environment as socialists, and that is of course not true. One of the theories of why the green movement is so leftist is because the populist socialists just used the environmental change in their favor, but that is just a theory. But if that is true, is there any other alternative for those people? The best alternative to this leftist narrative is, in my opinion, to promote abolition of governmental subsidies that sponsor the fossil fuel industry and push for more market and property-based solutions, and simply stop government from ever having ability to give companies any sort of subsidy. If those environmentalists actually care about property, the next best alternative is a Hayekist system, because that one can work with some sort of basic welfare. And if those environmentalists want polluters to pay for the pollution and they hate landlords at the same time, the third best option is the system based on Henry George's land value tax and ecological Pigovian taxes. I have talked about those on my channel before, and I will link that down in the description. As much as this example is not the most libertarian option, it can be a great introduction to more capitalist economics to those who would end up as economies, for example, because of the landlord hate fact. And hey, we could at least get abolition of income tax, so it's not that bad after all. Much better than eco-socialism, I think. So anyway, that was it. I hope you have enjoyed this video. If so, I would highly appreciate if you would subscribe and share. Thank you for watching, and for now, bye.